We only have 3 weeks left before the start of the fantasy football playoffs, and we're just a week away from Thanksgiving. Trade deadlines are coming up, so it's time to dive in some players that we want to be buying or selling before trade deadlines because of their playoff schedules. So we'll start with the quarterback position, and right away, I just want to say congratulations to those of you with Lamar Jackson and Drake May because they have been absolutely incredible this year and should finish very well with top 12 playoff schedules, especially Lamar having the third best schedule for the fantasy playoffs. If you have either one of these guys and you've been riding them as weekly starters, you do not need to worry about trading for a quarterback because you are set already with either one of them. After those two, you should also feel confident if you have Jackson Dart, Daniel Jones, and Jared Goff because all three of those guys also have great playoff schedules. And I would say that these three are my primary buy targets at the quarterback position if you don't really have a solidified guy because we have seen elite production from all three of them and they have the matchups to carry you through each week of the playoffs. We will get to the sell options in just a minute, but these three would be at the top of my list for buy candidates for the fantasy playoffs. I would also throw Brock Purdy into this list, assuming that he is healthy for the remainder of the year. I don't know if people realize just how well Purdy has played this year because he has been hurt for most of it, but in 3 games played, he has finished as a QB 14, 12, and 5, averaging over 19 fantasy points per game, which is basically the same as Justin Herbert, Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott, and Jaden Daniels. The Niners have the 7th easiest playoff schedule for quarterbacks, and with the Niners offense starting to get healthy again with Pearsall and Jennings back, maybe we get Brandon Ayuk back as well, plus they still have George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey. This is a dangerous offense with Kyle Shanahan calling plays, and we've seen Brock Purdy be a more than serviceable fantasy QB1 for multiple years in this system with these weapons. I think he is a massive sleeper in terms of being possibly the best trade target at quarterback for the rest of the year in all of fantasy football right now. After them, we have this next tier of quarterbacks that ride the gap between being useful or not if you can pick the right games, and that is Tua Tagovailoa and JJ McCarthy, who both currently have the best playoff schedules in fantasy right now. They're number 1 and number 2. I mean, it is just incredible for both of them, the matchups that they get. The issue, though, is do you really trust either one of them in your starting lineup in the playoffs? I mean, let me give you some examples here. In Week 15, Caleb Williams plays Cleveland, who shut down almost everybody on opposing offenses. That same week, J.J. McCarthy plays Dallas, and Tua also gets Pittsburgh. Which quarterback would you start that week? In Week 16, Sam Darnold gets the Rams again after they just shut him down this past Sunday. That same week, McCarthy plays the Giants. Tua gets Cincinnati at home. So which quarterback of those three would you start there? Finally, Week 17 championship week, Justin Herbert gets the Texans, while McCarthy gets the Lions at home, and Tua gets Tampa Bay at home. Which quarterback would you start that week for the fantasy championship? I'm not saying that you have to trade for either one of these guys as every week starters for the playoffs, but there are definitely situations where they might be better starts than the guy that you currently have right now. And it's possible that you don't have to trade for either of them right now. They might be on waivers to scoop up and stash for one specific week if you are heading to the playoffs. This is just information to know, and if you have the stomach to play either one of them and they score 20 or more points, then you look like an absolute genius. Finally, for quarterbacks with great playoff schedules, the last 2 interesting names come from 2 injured stars in Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow. Daniels has not gone on IR yet and does not need surgery on his arm and are entering the bye week this week, so they can reevaluate him heading into Week 13 off of 2 weeks of rest. Joe Burrow has publicly come out and said that he wants to be back for their Week 13 game against the Ravens on Thanksgiving, which is absolutely crazy to me that he could be playing 2 months after turf toe surgery, but that's at least what Joe Burrow is saying. Should either or both of them come back and play, they both also have great playoff schedules too, especially Jaden Daniels getting the Dallas Cowboys in championship week. Now, I don't know if either one of them was going to be back or not, but it is worth mentioning that they could be options for you if you have them on waiver wires or if you just have them stashed on your IR spot or the back end of your bench, especially if other people in your league aren't as plugged into the news and think that they're done for the year. But additionally, though, if neither one of them return, that does mean that Joe Flacco and Marcus Mariota could be good options for playoff starters, especially, again, Mariota in Week 17 against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, looking at the guys with the hardest playoff schedules that we might want to move off of, I'm going to start by saying that Buffalo has the 5th hardest playoff schedule for quarterbacks, but I don't really care all that much because it is Josh Allen. The dude literally just had 6 touchdowns on Sunday, and it is Josh freaking Allen. He He has a great matchup in Week 15 against the Patriots, but then gets Cleveland and Philly in Weeks 16 and 17. Cleveland did give up 4 touchdowns to Lamar, 3 touchdowns to Drake May earlier this year, so they have been beaten by elite quarterbacks. Philly has also been beaten by Patrick Mahomes and Jackson Dart twice by allowing rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. Baker also put up 290 and 2 on them as well, so they can be beat as well. So if you have Josh Allen, I'm really not too worried about it, but if you wanted to trade him for Lamar or Drake May because of their playoff schedules, I don't mind that either. But again, at the end of the day, you still have Josh Allen, so he's totally fine. The bigger name I am more scared for is Patrick Mahomes, who actually has the hardest playoff schedule among all quarterbacks. He gets the Chargers, Titans, and Broncos from weeks 15 through 17, plus a week 14 matchup against the Texans, which could screw you over if you need to win that week to even get into the playoffs. We got a very nice preview of Mahomes against the Broncos defense this past week, where Denver limited him to just 1 touchdown, but he did at least throw for 276 yards. 18 fantasy points is totally fine, but that doesn't really make him any different than a lot of other quarterbacks. So you're not going to have the quarterback advantage with Mahomes scoring just 18 fantasy points, as opposed to Lamar getting Cincinnati's defense, or Drake May getting the Jets, or maybe even J.J. McCarthy against the Dallas Cowboys. So I would entertain deals like Mahomes for Jared Goff plus, Daniel Jones plus, Jackson Dart plus, Brock Purdy plus, or again, go for Lamar or Drake May if you can make that work. He is the one name that I am pretty scared of to have because he may not be the reason you lose a matchup outright, but he may not be someone who helps you win and you get booted in round 1. Now, the other names that I have moderate concern for are Baker Mayfield, Matthew Stafford, Caleb Williams, and Justin Herbert. I'm not at the point to where you have to sell these guys, but I do think that you should have alternative plans for them in certain weeks. For example, Justin Herbert gets Dallas in week 16. Fantastic matchup, and I would love to play him in the semifinals. Might be a big reason why you even get to the championship. But he also gets Kansas City in week 15 and then Houston in week 17, and I would love to not play him in those weeks. So maybe that's where, instead of just trading Justin Herbert away, you stash another quarterback like Brock Purdy or maybe McCarthy or Tua for the other 2 weeks. You play McCarthy against Dallas in week 15, Herbert against Dallas in week 16, then Purdy in week 17 against Chicago, or Mariota in week 17 against Dallas, again, if Jaden Daniels is out. Same goes for Baker Mayfield. He has a great matchup against Miami in week 17, but bad matchups leading up to that, to where you don't get that championship game for Baker if you're not in the championship. So plan around the other weeks of these bad matchups for these quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence has a great week 15 matchup against the Jets. Darnold gets the Colts at home in week 15. Bo Nix gets the Jaguars at home in week 16. Love gets the Bears in week 16. And this does sound gross, but Jacoby Brissett, assuming that he is still the starter at this point, gets Cincinnati in week 17. So if you have Baker, Stafford, Caleb, or Herbert, start planning your playoff matchups with the guys that I listed as stashes. Or if you wanted to pivot off to Jared Goff, Jackson Dart, Daniel Jones, or Brock Purdy, I don't mind that either. Looking at the running back position, I would like to extend my congratulations to those of you with Devon Achane and Christian McCaffrey, because they are just producing at an elite level right now, and they have top 6 playoff schedules. So congratulations on your championship if you have those guys. The 2 other high-profile names on this list, though, are Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, guys who should produce very well given their playoff schedules, but as we know right now, Jacobs is dealing with a knee injury that he should be back from by the time you even get to the playoffs, but that does kind of just muddy the water a little bit in terms of how effective he's going to be. Maybe he re-aggravates the injury and then he's sitting out in the playoffs. I don't really know, but if Josh Jacobs is healthy, I would love to play him in the fantasy playoffs. He also does get Denver in week 15, which is not ideal, but if you have a first-round bye, that really wouldn't matter to you. Now, as for Saquon Barkley, it hasn't been the greatest year for him, especially from where you drafted him, but he is still the RB11 overall in PPR leagues and is averaging over 15 fantasy points per game. And especially when his playoff schedule is Vegas, Washington, then Buffalo as the 8th best schedule among running backs right now, I think you have to feel confident having Saquon on your team for the championship run, and we might even get 1 or 2 vintage 2024 Saquon Barkley performances in those matchups as well. If you wanted to add another name to this kind of higher profile with some uncertainties tier, you could also add in TreVeyon Henderson, who of course has been on an absolute tear since Ramondre Stevenson got hurt and has the 4th best playoff schedule for running backs. I would love to sit here and tell you that TreVeyon will continue lighting it up for fantasy football, but with Ramondre Stevenson coming back, I don't feel comfortable doing that right now. I still think he's done enough that you can't just put him back in his RB2 role behind Ramondre Stevenson when Stevenson's back, but I still fear that Vrabel is going to scale back his work a little bit, especially around the goal line. And if he's not getting as many chances to break a big play or score a touchdown, he might be more of an RB2, top 25 kind of guy than like the RB1 that he's been the past 2 weeks. Still, though, the schedule is absolutely there for Travion, and unless you parlay his production into someone like Achane or Christian McCaffrey or even Saquon Barkley, I don't know how you're not playing Travion Henderson in the playoffs, given what he's done the past couple of weeks. But getting to actual buy candidates for running backs, though, I think you have to be looking at Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Aaron Jones, and the sleeper name of Trey Benson. I highlighted Bucky Irving in last week's video as a guy to look for before he returns from injury. He was great before he got hurt. He averaged 18 PPR points per game, which is still top 8 in running backs in points per game, and he has the 12th best playoff schedule for the running back position. If you can still buy him quote-unquote low before he returns from injury in maybe a week or two, that could be a massive move for your team's championship odds. Chase Brown and Aaron Jones feel similar in that they are solid RB2 performers that won't cost you an arm and a leg, so if you're looking for that RB2 or flex guy that can produce well down the stretch, I would be looking at both Brown and Jones as good starters on decent offenses with great playoff schedules. And then we get to Trey Benson, who has not played a game since week 4, and reports are still saying that he is progressing, but with no timeline of an expected return. Still, though, he has a couple of weeks to get back before his playoff schedule kicks in, which is actually the second best schedule for running backs, with games against Houston, which I don't love, but then Atlanta and then Cincinnati in weeks 16 and 17. We still really haven't even seen Benson as the starter for Arizona outside of that week 4 game where he didn't produce much, but in that game, he accounted for 70% of the team's backfield carries, 70% of the running back targets, so he was 100% their workhorse running back without James Conner, rushing for over 4 yards per carry and also seeing 5 targets. He just didn't do all that well because they played Seattle, who has a great run defense. But give him 15-plus touches in games against bad run defenses, and he could be a very sneaky buy candidate right now that could help you win a championship this season. In terms of bad playoff schedules for running backs, James Cook, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson all pretty much have terrible playoff schedules. And that sucks because you're not benching these guys in the playoffs. They're probably all reasons why you even made the playoffs in the first place. And imagine getting cute, benching them only for them to have a great game and putting up 20-plus points on your bench, and now you're known as the guy that sat Jahmyr Gibbs in the playoffs because you thought you were smart. Still, though, I don't love their matchups, and if I had them outside of trying to pivot to Christian McCaffrey or Devon Achane, I don't really think you can trade them. You just kind of got to go through it and maybe try to optimize your lineup in different ways across different positions to try to make up for maybe the lack of ceiling from these guys in more tougher situations. A tier below them sits Kyren Williams and Breece Hall, and maybe you also include Javonte and Travis Etienne in here too as higher caliber RB2s or even back-end RB1s. I would be considering moving off of these guys more than these super elite names because these guys feel a little bit more game script and matchup dependent, and if their offenses get shut down or they get to be more pass-heavy game scripts, these running backs could be okay for fantasy, but maybe not great, especially if they're not scoring touchdowns. So this is where I would consider moving from these guys over to Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs or Bucky Irving, maybe even like a Rico Dowdle type of player whose playoff schedule is 17th, so it's not great, but it's not bad either, and he is their RB1 right now. Maybe you consider moving to Aaron Jones or Chase Brown if you also get an upgrade at a different position. It's not bad to keep these guys either, especially Javonte. He gets Washington in week 17, which is phenomenal, but you got to get there first. And I'm highlighting these names that maybe you could move for more ideal playoff schedules. Lastly, if you have players like DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Walker, RJ Harvey, and even Woody Marks to a degree, you probably shouldn't really be trusting them as locks in your lineup for the fantasy playoffs. These players already have inconsistencies and trust issues in neutral or even good matchups, but their playoff schedules are horrible that it makes them even harder to trust when it matters most. So these are the guys that I would actively be trying to pivot from over to Aaron Jones, over to Chase Brown, or maybe try to buy low on an Ashton Genty off of a bad Week 11 game. Moving on to wide receivers, once again, I would like to extend my congratulations to those of you with Jackson Smith-Njigba and Amon-Ra St. Brown, who both have tremendous playoff schedules. And the fun thing about the Lions this year is that they will need to win games down the stretch because they are not currently in first place in their division. So home field advantage and playoff seeding is going to be very important to them. And with how terrible the schedule is for their running backs, if defenses are able to hold Gibbs and Monty in check and force Jared Goff to throw more, then that's just even better for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Oh, and Jackson Smith-Njigba might end the year as the wide receiver fantasy MVP. He's just been so good, and his schedule is so amazing that he's going to end the season winning a lot of people some championships. There are two other elite receiver names that I wanted to say congratulations for, but I paused on them because of their current situations. But if they hit down the stretch, they would be elite, and that is Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown. Jefferson actually has the best playoff schedule among all wide receivers with the Cowboys, Giants, and Lions. That is tremendous. And even week 14 to get into the playoffs, he gets the Washington Commanders. His only issue right now is that J.J. McCarthy low-key kind of sucks, and that is killing Jefferson's ceiling, even in what should be good matchups. McCarthy just cannot get the ball to Justin Jefferson consistently, and it is maddening, and it is really hurting his ceiling and overall fantasy production. But if they can figure it out and take advantage of their soft defensive schedule, Jefferson could be fantastic for championship runs. The same goes for A.J. Brown. All we need is for Philly to just throw more. Use your offense. It is immensely frustrating to have watched A.J. Brown average like 90 yards per game for 3 years with Philadelphia, and now they just decide, nah, we don't really need to throw it much anymore. Like, at least last year, I understood it because no one was stopping Saquon Barkley, but this year, Saquon has been much more of an average running back, and they still aren't throwing the ball consistently. And we know they can do it because we've seen it a couple times this year when opposing offenses force them into it. So, like Justin Jefferson, if Philly just decides to start throwing again against these really good matchups, A.J. Brown could be so good down the stretch, they just need to actually use him for fantasy football. But getting into actual wide receiver buy candidates for the fantasy playoffs, I would be looking at Jaylen Waddle, Jameson Williams, Zay Flowers, Rome Odunze, and Wan'Dale Robinson. If you wanted to throw Jordan Addison and Devontae Smith in here, I don't mind it. They just come with all the issues that I just mentioned for Jefferson and A.J. Brown, except it's a little bit worse for them because they're the wide receiver 2s on their teams. Still, though, if you catch the right games for them, they could be top 15 wide receivers. But specifically, I want to highlight Waddle, Jamo, Odunze, Flowers, and Wan'Dale. I think Jaylen Waddle could legitimately be a league winner this year. I've highlighted him multiple times over the past few weeks in my buy videos, and if you have yet to try to trade for him, your window is closing rapidly. He has been tremendous since Tyreek Hill went down, and his schedule is incredible to end the year. I think he's still mostly priced as a wide receiver 2, but I think is a legit wide receiver 1 for the rest of the season. Jameson Williams has now entered the conversation as a strong buy candidate down the stretch after 3 straight games with 6+ targets, 4+ receptions, 60+ receiving yards, and a touchdown in all 3 games. And that is significant because his usage changed coming right out of the bye and with Dan Campbell starting to call plays. And Sam Laporta was put on IR, so he is out for a minimum of 3 more weeks, and Dan Campbell even said that he is, quote, hopeful that he'll be back before the end of the season. So if he's out for any games in the fantasy playoffs, that only enhances confidence in Jameson Williams as having a very nice floor, plus his massive ceiling. Flowers has been extremely quiet basically all year other than a massive 28-point week 1. He's been okay most weeks as more of a floor play in like the 11 to 14-point range, but he hasn't had that one boom explosion game since week 1. Some of this can be explained by Lamar's injuries this year, but also Flowers just kind of tends to not be needed because the Ravens can win in many other ways. But in games where the Ravens have to throw more, Flowers can do really well, and that is what I like about his playoff schedule, is it's against soft pass defenses in Cincinnati, New England, and Green Bay, but all 3 of those offenses can absolutely score on Baltimore as well. So Flowers could be needed more in those games than just being like a floor guy of like 5 catches for 60 yards. And maybe he's more of like an 8 catch for 90 yards and maybe scores a touchdown in a game or 2 as well. He should be cheaper to buy too. So if you need a wide receiver 3 or a flex option in the playoffs, I do not mind trying to buy Zay Flowers. The same thing goes for Rome Odunze, who has been up and down all year, but if you can catch the right games, he can be very good by either going over 80 yards or even scoring a touchdown. I don't love the Week 15 matchup against Cleveland. It's fine for wide receivers, but it's not great. But then Green Bay and San Francisco are very nice matchups to end the season in Week 16 and 17. And finally, we have Wan'Dale Robinson, who I believe I highlighted in last week's video as a buy, mainly as another floor option who could have bigger games down the stretch because of his playoff schedule of Washington, Minnesota, and Vegas. He's by far the cheapest of this whole entire group, but sometimes that's all you really need is just a nice spot start or a better matchup than your other wide receiver 2 or flex option. And sometimes it is guys like Wan'Dale Robinson that keep your playoff hopes alive. So do not overlook him just because it's Wan'Dale Robinson or just because he's not like a very big name. Looking at receivers with bad schedules, we have some elite names here like Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and George Pickens, Emeka Egbuka, Rashee Rice, and Nico Collins. They all have really tough matchups. Rashee Rice especially actually has the hardest playoff schedule among all wide receivers. Again, though, as was the case with the elite running backs and quarterbacks that have hard playoff schedules, I'm not so sure that I care as much because these guys are pretty elite to where, sure, if you wanted to pivot over to Amon-Ra or JSN or even over to Jefferson or A.J. Brown from guys like Rashee Rice and Nico Collins, that would be nice for better playoff matchups, but those aren't moves that you desperately have to do because you still have some pretty great receivers if you keep those guys. The names that I am more likely to move off of are Courtland Sutton, Chris Olave, and Marvin Harrison Jr., all of whom have bottom 5 schedules for wide receivers and are already in that weird production tier of like, can you trust them on a weekly basis? Maybe in good matchups you feel good about playing them, but in the mediocre to bad offenses they play in with mediocre to bad quarterback play, going up against really difficult defenses like Houston and Kansas City, Carolina, Jacksonville to a degree, Atlanta to a degree. Like, these are the names that I would love to move away from for the receivers that I mentioned as buy candidates like Jameson Williams, Rome Odunze, Zay Flowers, or even Wan'Dale Robinson. And if you can get something with Wan'Dale, that is phenomenal. It's just because I don't think I trust these guys in crunch time in bad matchups. Finally, we get to the tight end position. There's really not a lot to talk about here, but there are some names to be aware of on both sides of the playoff schedules. In terms of great playoff schedules, first of all, congratulations if you have Trey McBride, Tyler Warren, and George Kittle, especially Trey McBride because he gets Cincy in championship week. So congratulations if you have Trey McBride on your championship, and good luck if you're playing against him. But some buy candidates with good playoff schedules for the tight end position could be Mark Andrews and Jake Ferguson, maybe even a Kyle Pitts or a Jawan Johnson, who have much more average playoff schedules, but they also have nice target volume on a weekly basis. There are some sleeper names to watch for, too, in Brenton Strange coming back from injury, Mason Taylor now with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, and maybe no Garrett Wilson. And then Greg Dulcich for the Miami Dolphins has gotten pretty solid work over the past few weeks since Darren Waller went down. They all could be very sneaky tight end streamers during the playoffs, especially if you don't have that top guy. On the other side, Brock Bowers actually has the hardest playoff schedule among all tight ends, but I don't think I really care about that because it's Brock Bowers. Trade him for Trey McBride, trade him for Tyler Warren if you want, but it is still Brock Bowers. I'm not scared of the playoff matchup if you have him. Travis Kelce has the 6th hardest schedule, and I would be looking to move from him over to Tyler Warren or George Kittle if you can. Oronde Gadsden also have a tough schedule, so you could look to pivot to one of the better guys as well. And then we have names like Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, Dalton Kincaid, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz, and Hunter Henry. All of them are bottom 10 in playoff schedules at the position. And this is probably the group where you can't really upgrade from them, but if you wanted to try to stash a Brenton Strange, Mason Taylor, or Greg Dulcich to try to mix and match throughout the playoffs, you could try that. I will say, if you are making the playoffs having started Goddard or Ertz or Schultz or anyone else that I just named here in most of your weeks, you probably have a very good roster anyway, and I wouldn't really worry too much about trying to upgrade your tight end position. But if you can find ways to optimize or better stream the position, that could be a very good use of your bench spots as we approach the fantasy playoffs. But if you're looking for some help with defenses or kickers to stream this week or even rest of season, especially as we get into the fantasy playoffs, I highly recommend checking out Kayla's videos from earlier this week right up here.